If you have been following this series, you already know what breaks at 15 and 25 employees. At 15, there were 5 things. At 25, there were only 3, but they were big. And here's the thing I said at the end of that last episode, the 25 episode, and I meant it. 50 is consequence. Every founder I have worked with who hits 50 employees and says this feels impossibly hard, when we go to dig in with them to find out why, there are almost always things that trace us back to things that were never fixed at 15 or 25. They did not see them as people problems then. They still might not now, but now that they're at 50, there's a whole other list of things that break. 6 to be exact, and we're going to talk about them today. Because 50 exposes everything. So whether you are sitting at 40 employees right now building toward this, or you are already at 55 and wondering why nothing feels right, this episode is for you. First, let me say this. 50 employees is real. That is not nothing. Revenue is coming in. You have a team with actual depth. You probably have real leaders in place or a lot of people with leadership titles. You have grown something really special. That's worth acknowledging. But 50 is a completely different animal than 25. It's not harder in degree, it's harder in kind. At 15 and 25, the problems were structural but still movable. You could get in there personally and fix things. At 50, you are so far from the work. The problems have had time to harden, and you are managing more people, more layers, and more complexity than you probably feel equipped for, especially if the foundation was never built. There are 6 things I consistently see breaking at 50. None of them are surprises. Every single one has an origin story at 15 or 25. But at 50, they are no longer quiet. They are very, very loud. Break 1 is leadership consistency across the C-suite. By the time you hit 50 employees, most companies have some version of a C-suite. You may not have a full bench. You might not have every seat filled with a C leader, but you have got a few chiefs. If I'm guessing, it's probably a CFO, maybe a COO, very likely a CMO or product leader. You have got people at the top who are supposed to be running these functions. And where I see things break is when those leaders are not operating consistently at a C level. They have different standards, different behavioral expectations, different definitions of what accountability or success looks like, what performance looks like, what good communication looks like, and all of that inconsistency flows directly down into their teams. I talked at the 25 employee mark about the risk of managers managing managers when there is no shared frameworks. At 50, you have chiefs managing managers, managing individual contributors. Every layer of misalignment that existed at 25 is now at least 3 levels deep. So everything compounds. And here's what I really see that creates massive difficulty. Your C-suite leaders should be operating above the work. If your CFO is still in the spreadsheets, if your COO is still running daily ops fires, if your CMO is still writing copy, no one is actually steering those functions strategically. I talked at the 15 employee mark about the CEO needing to get above the business. That same principle now applies to every leader at the top of your organization. What this stage requires is behavioral expectations and performance standards that are documented and shared across leadership. It also requires that those leaders know how to collaborate together and aren't playing like the leaders of countries only interested in their and their team's own self-preservation. And finally, it requires an honest assessment. Do your leaders have the support systems around them to actually do their jobs, to actually lead? Are they surrounded by the right people? Or are they still doing work that should be 3 levels below them? If you have not built leadership consistency before 50, this is where the dysfunction really starts to calcify. Because now it's not just one manager doing things differently. It is an entire leadership layer, each running their own version of your company. Break number 2 is employee relations issues spike. I've been doing this for nearly 15 years, and I can tell you with confidence, around 50 to 60 employees is where employee relations issues increase like crazy. Not slightly, dramatically. Personality conflicts that used to be manageable become chronic. People who could avoid each other now have to collaborate, and the friction becomes a constant operational drain. You are more likely at this stage, 50 employees, to see more harassment claims surface, more bullying, more interpersonal issues that have really been simmering for months finally boil over. Again, why does this happen at this number? Because I guess you now have enough people, enough hierarchy, and enough distance from leadership that things fester instead of getting resolved. Problems that would have come to you directly at 20 employees now pass through 2 or 3 layers before anyone even knows they exist, if they even surface at all. And most small businesses, they don't have someone skilled navigating these issues, someone who can guide you through how to handle them properly. So errors are made. A badly handled harassment claim, a poorly documented performance issue, a conflict that gets dismissed as a personality problem instead of investigated properly. At 50 employees, the cost of getting that wrong is not a hard conversation. It's a lawsuit. It's a toxic team or a mass exit of your best people. I said at 25 that behavioral expectations and performance standards need to be defined and enforced. At 50, this is no longer an infrastructure conversation. It is a risk conversation. If you have not built that foundation, you are walking into this stage completely exposed. Break number 3, the employee population becomes a drain. At 50 employees, the sheer complexity of managing your people escalates fast. You have more leaves of absence, more accommodation requests, higher benefit expectations, higher expectations around systems and technology. Employees who have been around for a few years start noticing that what you offered them when they joined does not match what your newer hires are getting, or that your benefits package has not kept pace with the market. At 15 employees, we talked about HR infrastructure being the absolute bare minimum. Consistent payroll, written policies, compliance basics, bare minimum. At 25, we talked about employee experience becoming intentional rather than organic. If neither of those things happened, you are now managing a people operation with 50 plus employees on infrastructure that was built for less than 10. And the thing about this is the employee population does not have to be a drain. With the right infrastructure, with the right person or team skilled in navigating it, it becomes one of your biggest competitive advantages. But without that, every single people issue becomes a fire. And you are fighting those fires while also trying to run a significantly more complex business than at any time before. At 50, you need someone who can manage the complexity of your employee population. That could be an in-house HR leader, or it could be an outsourced partner who has the expertise. But having nobody skilled in this seat at 50 employees is not a risk I would take. Break number 4 is that communication architecture fails. Under 20 people, information moves organically. You are in the same room or you're on the same calls and things just flow. Decisions get made and everyone who needs to know finds out because there are only so many people to tell. At 50, and really this happens before, that totally stops working. Silos form so fast, it can feel like teams start operating on completely different realities. Decisions get made in rooms where the people who need to know are not present. Someone hears about a major change third hand 3 weeks after it happened. Leaders are misaligned on strategy because no one took the time to make sure communication cascaded all the way down. CEOs almost always misread this as a culture problem, like they do many things. It feels like disengagement, like people do not care, like the energy has changed. And sometimes all of that is true. But more often, it is this communication design problem. You have not built the structures that make information move intentionally, especially through a 50-person organization. What this requires, it's not really complicated, but it does need to be deliberate. Leadership cadences, regular rhythms where your leadership team is aligned and talking. Very clear norms around what lives in what channel, Teams, chat, email. Structured ways for information to travel down through the org, not just up. And cross-functional visibility so teams are not operating in complete isolation from each other. At 25 employees, I talked about how defining how your team communicates, like what belongs in chat versus email versus a meeting, how fast you respond to each other. We have SLAs around these things. If you built that, this becomes an extension of that. If you did not, you are now trying to retrofit communication norms into an organization that has already developed its own informal and usually dysfunctional patterns. Break number 5 is compensation inequity surfaces. Here is one that is almost universal by the time you hit 50, and it almost always comes as a surprise when it surfaces to leaders, and that is compensation inequity. When you are small and you're hiring fast, you make individual decisions. Someone negotiates really hard in the recruitment process. Someone else comes in during a really tight market. Someone got a quick raise because you needed to retain them. None of these decisions felt wrong at the time. But by 50 employees, you have 3 years or more of individual compensation decisions stacked on top of each other, with absolutely no framework underneath them. And then someone finds out. They find out that a peer is making significantly more for the same role, or worse, someone junior is making more than someone senior because of when they were hired. Or your most loyal employees, the ones who have been with you since the beginning, are now underpaid relative to the market because you have not kept pace. This one's really quiet, and then suddenly it is very loud. It becomes a quick trust issue, a quick retention issue, and often a legal issue. Because pay equity is not just a fairness conversation, there are compliance requirements around it. What this requires is a compensation philosophy and defined pay bands. Not a complicated system, just a clear framework for how you pay people at what levels for what roles. If you build this now, before someone starts talking, you get ahead of it. If you wait until the conversation is already happening, You are doing damage control and not building. We do have an entire video on this on our channel. I brought in my payroll and operations manager, but compensation is not something that you can wing. You do need to get expert help to put something in place now that continues to scale as you do. And then finally, break number 6 is that software and systems hit a wall. The last one here is the most tactical, but do not underestimate it. If your operations are still running on spreadsheets at 50 employees, the errors are coming if they aren't already everywhere. And I'm not just talking about human resources. I'm talking about across the board. If your CRM is a spreadsheet, if your project management lives in a spreadsheet, if your employee data is scattered across multiple files that nobody owns, you are going to start seeing massive cracks in how work gets done. Things fall through, data is wrong, 2 people are working from different versions of the truth. And nobody can figure out whose spreadsheet is the right one. At 50 employees, you need clear single sources of truth. An HRIS for your people data, benefits, time off, compliance, a project management system for how work gets done and who is accountable for that, a CRM for how you attract and retain clients. These do not have to be the most expensive, most complex systems on the market, but they do have to exist. And they do have to be the systems of record, not a nice to have that runs alongside the real work. The other part of this is that if you are asking your leaders to focus on strategy and growth, they cannot do that while they are wrestling with broken systems. Bad software, it's a leadership tax. Every hour a leader spends compensating for broken tools is an hour they are not spending on the things only they can do. Here's what I want you to take away from today. None of these 6 things are surprises. Every single one has an origin story. I talked about these shifts from 25 to 50 in the last video, and I'm going to bring them up again. I'm going to say them again in a few minutes, because if I know anything, it is that businesses, especially small businesses, often wait until the people issues become beyond painful to do anything about them. And if I can encourage you to not wait any longer, I really want to. So here's what I said. Weak onboarding at 25 becomes a turnover crisis at 50. Because now you have dozens of people who were never fully integrated, never really bought in, and they start leaving right around the time you can least afford it. Undefined behavioral expectations at 25 become hardened subcultures at 50. And now you are not shaping the employee experience, you are doing surgery on it. Untrained managers at 25 become a full leadership crisis at 50, because those managers have been making it up as they go, potentially for years. And that dysfunction they have created, the checked out teams, the performers who left, the conflicts that never got resolved, all of that is your inheritance. And now, with this episode, I'll add this. Compensation built informally from day one becomes an equity crisis at 50. Communication that was never designed becomes silos at 50. Software that was never upgraded becomes an operational ceiling at 50. 25 is leverage, 50 is consequence. I used that framing in the last video, and I'm going to use it again here. The difference is that at 25, you could still move fast. At 50, all of this is so much harder. You are so much further from the work. There are more people to align. The systems are more entrenched. The window is definitely smaller now. But here's the thing. You are watching this video, which means that you are thinking about this intentionally. And intentional beats reactive every single time in a small business. If you are not already subscribed, now is a really good time. The next episode in this series is going to be about what breaks at 75. And then the final one will be after that. And that is what breaks at 100 employees. And then after that, videos are going to focus on how do we fix all of this, taking them one by one, onboarding, employee experience, the infrastructure, the people, the systems. We are really going to get specific. Most small businesses build reactively. They focus on sales, marketing, and product, and they treat people as an afterthought until the people start costing them everything. A business where people building is intentional, where leadership is developed, where HR is treated as a growth strategy, that is a business that scales. Let's build that.